Went to work?
I did, yes, sir.
And what were you working on at work?
I was working on this Dominion Energy case, was primarily what I was working on, that we had motions coming up later in that week. As I said earlier, I believed at the time that it was the biggest case that I'd ever been involved in. And there were motions coming up in that. I was preparing. Danny Henderson, my partner that was helping me with the civil case from the boat wreck, had been on me about getting a financial statement, and I finished doing that so that it could be given to Danny. It's primary, is what I remember doing. Obviously, I talked to Jeannie, but
for over a year, South Carolina has been gripped by one of the most shocking legal scandals in recent memory. The murders of Margaret and Paul Murdaugh not only shattered a prominent family's image, but also set off a chain of events that would expose a labyrinth of financial crimes, staged shootings, and allegations of jury tampering. Alex Murdaugh, once a respected attorney in a dynasty of prosecutors, now sits in prison, convicted of murdering his wife and son. Yet questions still linger. New evidence has emerged, including cell phone videos placing him at the scene, contradicting his earlier alibi. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Forensic reports suggest the killings required extreme proximity, and yet Alex was reportedly at his mother's house shortly afterward, clean and unharmed. Could someone else have been involved? Might the timeline of events have been misinterpreted or even manipulated? And with a clerk accused of influencing the jury, is the conviction as airtight as it appears? As Alex's appeal approaches the South Carolina Supreme Court, the truth may be far more complex than it seems. Was this a meticulously plotted crime, a tragic family unraveling, or a convergence of circumstance and deception? What do you think really happened that night at the Murdaugh estate? The sequence of events on June 7, 2021 raises several questions about the killings of Margaret and Paul Murdaugh. The 911 call from Alex places him at the scene shortly after the murders, yet his lawyers maintain he was with his mother earlier. Could this gap in the timeline suggest that someone else was present at the property earlier that evening? The coroner's report confirms multiple gunshot wounds, with Paul sustaining a contact shot to the head. It's possible that the perpetrator acted quickly and with familiarity of the estate, given the lack of signs of forced entry. Alex's financial crimes and opioid addiction have dominated public attention, which could have created opportunities for others to exploit distractions. The involvement of Curtis Edward Smith in the staged roadside shooting adds a layer of complexity. Could someone within Murdaugh's circle have known of these schemes and had access to the property? While Alex was found guilty, the evidence shows inconsistencies in the timeline and no definitive fingerprints or DNA linking him to the actual shooting. What remains unclear is the motive beyond speculation. Could someone else with knowledge of the family dynamics and the estate have committed the crime? The case invites us to consider multiple possibilities. As the South Carolina Supreme Court prepares to hear Alex Murdaugh's appeal, questions linger over what truly happened on the night of June 7, 2021. The timeline paints a chaotic picture. Murdaugh reporting the deaths of his wife and son, his own questionable alibis, and a chain of financial crimes that cast a shadow over the murder investigation. But within these facts lie subtle details that might reshape how we understand the case. Consider the forensic evidence first. The coroner established that Margaret and Paul suffered multiple gunshot wounds in the estimated half hour between 9 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. But there are conflicting accounts regarding Murdaugh's whereabouts at that time. He claimed to have been visiting his mother 10 miles away, while the prosecution maintains he was present at the kennels. Could there be a possibility that someone else had access to the estate during this window? Someone who understood the family dynamics and the layout of the property? Or might Murdaugh's own account be clouded by substance use and stress, leading to misremembered details? The crime scene itself provides another avenue for speculation. There was no evidence of forced entry, no defensive wounds reported, and no sign of a struggle beyond the fatal gunshots. Could the perpetrator have been someone known to the family, perhaps someone granted implicit trust, or was there a calculated plan to leave the scene clean and untraceable? The fact that the victims were found near the kennels, an area both private and somewhat removed from the main house, raises questions. Might the killer have intended to stage the scene to suggest a domestic or random intrusion, or was it a place chosen simply for its isolation? Adding to the complexity are the numerous financial crimes tied to Murdaugh. From insurance fraud to embezzlement, these actions created a motive narrative that prosecutors leaned heavily on, that the murders were meant to distract from Murdaugh's legal troubles. Yet could the real motive have been unrelated? Perhaps the crimes coincided with the murders by coincidence, or maybe they simply provided investigators with a convenient lens to interpret the events. The sequence of charges and the layering of criminal behavior also opens the possibility that multiple individuals could have been involved, knowingly or unknowingly, complicating the narrative further. Murdaugh's own statements during trial and in interviews add additional layers for consideration. He admitted to lying about his location, his interaction with the victims, and even aspects of his own family's affairs. Could these lies be defensive mechanisms designed to protect himself from scrutiny, or might they inadvertently obscure the true timeline of events? Similarly, the allegations of jury tampering cast a shadow over the original trial's integrity. If the court's process was compromised, could a reevaluation of evidence reveal alternate interpretations of the same facts? The presence of others in the family orbit also invites further speculation. Curtis Edward Smith, the man involved in the staged roadside shooting, had prior contact with Murdaugh's financial schemes and was allegedly complicit in other schemes. Could Smith or another acquaintance have had opportunities to act independently, with or without Murdaugh's knowledge? While no direct evidence currently ties anyone else to the murders, the overlap between personal relationships and criminal activity leaves the door open to multiple scenarios. Finally, the timeline of post-crime behavior is notable. Murdaugh reportedly visited his mother's house shortly after the murders without signs of blood or trauma on his person. Could this suggest that the scene of the killings was somehow manipulated, or that the actual sequence of events differs from the official narrative? Might the real perpetrator have staged certain aspects to implicate Murdaugh, taking advantage of his documented personal struggles and high-profile financial misconduct? As the appeal moves forward, one thing is clear. The story of the Murdaugh murders is far from simple. Every fact seems to intertwine with potential motives, opportunity, and human error. Could there be a hidden detail yet undiscovered, a witness unaccounted for, or forensic evidence overlooked? As viewers, we're left asking the same question investigators must confront. What truly happened that night? And could justice be seeing a new perspective in the Supreme Court? What do you think? Could there be more to this story than what was presented in the courtroom, or does the evidence point clearly to the convicted party? The answers may lie in the upcoming appeal, but until then, the case remains a tangled web of possibility, intrigue, and unanswered questions. As the spotlight turns to the appeal, Murdaugh's defense attorney, Dick Harpootlian, has become the voice many are listening to closely. For months, he has outlined the technical and extraordinary claims that could reshape the outcome of a trial that left South Carolina in shock. At the heart of this appeal is an allegation that almost defies belief. The elected Colleton County Clerk of Court, Rebecca Hill, may have attempted to influence the jury's verdict. The implications are massive. Could jury tampering, if proven, overturn a conviction that has already captivated the nation? Harpootlian insists it's not just procedural, it's fundamental to whether justice was truly served. Factually, the original trial included extensive testimony about Murdaugh's financial crimes, a tangled web of alleged fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering spanning years. While Murdaugh admitted to many of these charges, the defense argues that prosecutors used them to suggest a motive for murder, that he killed his wife Margaret and son Paul to distract investigators from his financial misconduct. Harpootlian calls this the thinnest of motives, emphasizing that the sequence of events surrounding the murders does not line up neatly with this narrative. Consider this. Forensic experts testified that Paul was killed by a contact gunshot to the head, an act that would have covered anyone at the scene in blood. Yet, Murdaugh's lawyers point out, within 45 minutes of this fatal shot, he was reportedly at his mother's house, 10 miles away, with no trace of blood or forensic evidence linking him to the scene. Could it be that someone else committed the murders, and the timing of Murdaugh's movements simply doesn't fit the prosecution's timeline? Or could the forensic interpretation of the evidence have overlooked critical details that might suggest an alternate scenario? Another key point raised by the defense concerns Murdaugh's repeated lies to law enforcement about his whereabouts the night of the murders. "Once I lied, I continued to lie," he admitted in court, describing what he called a tangled web of deceit. While these lies complicate the narrative, the defense stresses that lying about one's movements or addiction issues does not equal committing murder. It is entirely possible that Murdaugh's opioid dependency and fear of scrutiny led him to fabricate certain details, without necessarily implicating him in the killings themselves. Harpootlian also notes the absence of critical physical evidence linking Murdaugh to the murders. There are no fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness accounts placing him at the moment of the crime. Could the prosecution's case have relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence and interpretations of motive rather than hard, verifiable facts? It's a question that may now be central to the appeal. The jury tampering allegations add another layer of complexity. Hill, under oath, denied influencing the jury, yet the defense asserts that her conduct could have subtly but materially affected how jurors perceived Murdaugh's credibility. If jurors were improperly swayed, even unintentionally, the fairness of the trial comes into question. Could a second trial, free from such influence, yield a completely different outcome? Throughout all of this, one lingering question persists. Who else could have committed these murders? Harpootlian refrains from speculating on names, instead focusing on sequence and possibility. Could someone have had access to the family's property, intimate knowledge of their routines, and the capability to carry out such a violent act? Was there an unknown conflict or grudge that remains hidden behind the public narrative of Murdaugh's financial crimes? The possibilities, he suggests, remain open. In the court of public opinion, Murdaugh remains a polarizing figure, guilty in many eyes for his fraud, but unproven in murder beyond the legal verdict. The appeal now shifts attention from sensational headlines to a careful examination of facts, the physical evidence, the timeline, the alleged jury tampering, and the logical gaps between assumption and proof. As the South Carolina Supreme Court prepares to hear arguments, one fact stands firm. The narrative is not as simple as it appears, and as viewers and true crime enthusiasts, we are left to ask ourselves the same question Harpootlian poses subtly throughout this process. If the evidence tells a different story than the one presented at trial, what could that story be? What do you think? By early 2023, the focus of the Murdaugh case had shifted dramatically. While initial investigations and media coverage centered almost exclusively on the question of guilt, whether Alex Murdaugh had murdered his wife and son, the narrative now began to pivot toward the trial process itself. The appeals that followed his conviction raised complex legal questions about what evidence was permitted, what was excluded, and how procedural decisions may have shaped the outcome. At the heart of the appeal is the argument that critical evidence related to Murdaugh's financial crimes was allowed to influence the jury's perception of motive. The prosecution had presented 2.5 weeks of testimony detailing Murdaugh's financial schemes, portraying the double murder as an attempt to distract from these crimes. Defense attorneys have argued that the emphasis on financial wrongdoing created an implicit bias, leading jurors to link his financial misconduct to the murders, even though no direct evidence tied him to the crime scene. Another central issue involves allegations of jury tampering. The Colleton County Clerk of Court, Rebecca Hill, who was responsible for swearing in jurors and guiding them through the trial, was accused of exerting undue influence on the jury. Defense motions contend that Hill advised jurors not to believe Murdaugh's testimony, misrepresented information to the trial judge, and pressured jurors to reach a guilty verdict. Although Hill denied wrongdoing initially, she later pled guilty to perjury in a related proceeding. If these claims are substantiated, they could form the basis for a new trial, raising questions not about Murdaugh's actions, but about the fairness of the trial process itself. Video evidence has also come under scrutiny. Investigators had released cell phone footage that placed Murdaugh at the estate shortly before the killings, contradicting his original alibi. However, forensic experts noted inconsistencies in the timeline. For instance, Paul Murdaugh's fatal contact shotgun wound would likely have produced significant blood spatter, yet no traces were found on Murdaugh when he was later seen visiting his mother 10 miles away. The absence of physical evidence, such as blood or fingerprints, leaves room for alternative theories about the sequence of events. Could someone else have committed the killings during the narrow window identified by the coroner? Might Murdaugh's presence at the estate have been coincidental, unrelated to the actual act of murder? These questions remain open, feeding the appeal's argument that the trial relied on circumstantial interpretation rather than incontrovertible fact. Additionally, Murdaugh's own admissions of dishonesty complicate the narrative. He testified that he lied repeatedly to law enforcement due to addiction and paranoia. While these lies undermined his credibility, they do not directly equate to guilt for murder. Defense attorneys highlight this distinction, arguing that a tangled web of false statements about minor details should not override a lack of direct evidence linking him to the fatal act. Could a more transparent investigation or a clearer separation between his financial misconduct and the murder trial have altered the jury's perception? The broader pattern of legal maneuvering also comes into play. The defense has noted that multiple high-profile charges, including federal financial crimes, ongoing suits, and even unresolved deaths connected to the Murdaugh family, may have influenced both the courtroom atmosphere and public perception. While these matters are factual, their relevance to the murder trial remains contentious. Could the presence of overlapping investigations have created implicit bias, prompting jurors to fill gaps with assumption rather than evidence? Might a more isolated trial focused strictly on the killings have yielded different deliberations? Finally, the appeal raises the enduring question of fairness in high-profile cases. Murdaugh's family connections, the intensity of media coverage, and the unique circumstances of his personal and financial life create a complex backdrop for judicial review. While the conviction remains legally binding, the questions raised about jury conduct, admissibility of evidence, and procedural integrity invite a careful reconsideration. Ultimately, the trial process itself has become a focal point in understanding the Murdaugh case. Facts, timelines, and legal technicalities now intersect with questions of bias, fairness, and judicial oversight. For audiences watching the saga unfold, the emerging theory is not about pinpointing a culprit in isolation, but asking, could the outcome have been different if the trial had been conducted under stricter procedural safeguards? Might unseen influences have shaped the verdict as much as the evidence itself? What do you think? Was justice served, or is the legal system being tested in ways that challenge our perception of truth? In the months following Alex Murdaugh's conviction for the murders of his wife and son, a startling new allegation emerged, one that challenges not just the trial's outcome, but the integrity of the courtroom itself. Murdaugh's defense attorneys filed a motion claiming jury tampering, accusing Colleton County Clerk of Court Rebecca Hill of improper interference during the 6-week murder trial. According to the motion, Hill allegedly pressured jurors to disregard certain defense evidence, misrepresented information to the trial judge, and even worked to remove a juror thought to favor Murdaugh. Although Hill denied wrongdoing initially, she later pled guilty to perjury in a related proceeding. If these claims are substantiated, they could form the basis for a new trial, raising questions not about Murdaugh's actions, but about the fairness of the trial process itself. Video evidence has also come under scrutiny. Investigators had released cell phone footage that placed Murdaugh at the estate shortly before the killings, contradicting his original alibi. However, forensic experts noted inconsistencies in the timeline. For instance, Paul Murdaugh's fatal contact shotgun wound would likely have produced significant blood spatter, yet no traces were found on Murdaugh when he was later seen visiting his mother 10 miles away. The absence of physical evidence, such as blood or fingerprints, leaves room for alternative theories about the sequence of events. Could someone else have committed the killings during the narrow window identified by the coroner? Might Murdaugh's presence at the estate have been coincidental, unrelated to the actual act of murder? These questions remain open, feeding the appeal's argument that the trial relied on circumstantial interpretation rather than incontrovertible fact. Additionally, Murdaugh's own admissions of dishonesty complicate the narrative. He testified that he lied repeatedly to law enforcement due to addiction and paranoia. While these lies undermined his credibility, they do not directly equate to guilt for murder. Defense attorneys highlight this distinction, arguing that a tangled web of false statements about minor details should not override a lack of direct evidence linking him to the fatal act. Could a more transparent investigation or a clearer separation between his financial misconduct and the murder trial have altered the jury's perception? The broader pattern of legal maneuvering also comes into play. The defense has noted that multiple high-profile charges, including federal financial crimes, ongoing suits, and even unresolved deaths connected to the Murdaugh family, may have influenced both the courtroom atmosphere and public perception. While these matters are factual, their relevance to the murder trial remains contentious. Could the presence of overlapping investigations have created implicit bias, prompting jurors to fill gaps with assumption rather than evidence? Might a more isolated trial focused strictly on the killings have yielded different deliberations? Finally, the appeal raises the enduring question of fairness in high-profile cases. Murdaugh's family connections, the intensity of media coverage, and the unique circumstances of his personal and financial life create a complex backdrop for judicial review. While the conviction remains legally binding, the questions raised about jury conduct, admissibility of evidence, and procedural integrity invite a careful reconsideration. Ultimately, the trial process itself has become a focal point in understanding the Murdaugh case. Facts, timelines, and legal technicalities now intersect with questions of bias, fairness, and judicial oversight. For audiences watching the saga unfold, the emerging theory is not about pinpointing a culprit in isolation, but asking, could the outcome have been different if the trial had been conducted under stricter procedural safeguards? Might unseen influences have shaped the verdict as much as the evidence itself? What do you think? Was justice served, or is the legal system being tested in ways that challenge our perception of truth? In the months following Alex Murdaugh,
Finally, the jury tampering allegations intersect with Murdaugh's appeals and ongoing legal battles. His lawyers continue to push for a new trial, citing both procedural irregularities and the clerk's admitted perjury as potential grounds for overturning his murder convictions. While the South Carolina Supreme Court deliberates, the case stands as a rare example where courtroom administration itself becomes central to the legal drama. It is a reminder that in complex cases, justice depends not only on evidence, but also on the integrity of those entrusted to uphold it. What do you think? Could external influence have impacted one of the most scrutinized trials in recent U.S. history? Or would the evidence alone have been sufficient to convict Murdaugh? One of the most unexpected twists in the Murdaugh saga came not from the crime scene, nor from forensic reports, but from inside the courthouse itself. Rebecca Hill, the elected clerk of court in Colleton County, became the center of a controversy that could alter the very foundation of the murder trial. During the months-long proceedings in early 2023, Hill was responsible for swearing in jurors and shepherding them through the courthouse each day. Her role, while administrative, gave her consistent access to the jurors. Access that, according to Murdaugh's defense, was allegedly exploited to influence the verdict. In September 2023, Murdaugh's legal team filed a motion claiming that Hill had attempted to pressure the jury toward a guilty verdict. The allegations included advising jurors to not trust Murdaugh's testimony, misrepresenting key facts, and even attempting to remove a juror believed to be sympathetic to the defense. If proven, these claims could have been grounds for a retrial, an extraordinary situation in any court, let alone one already saturated with national attention. Hill, under oath, denied any wrongdoing. She maintained that she had not interfered with the jurors and insisted that all actions taken during the trial were strictly procedural. At the time, the motion remained unresolved, leaving the courtroom and the public suspended between suspicion and certainty. Yet, in a startling development later in 2023, Hill pleaded guilty to perjury during the trial proceedings. The admission raised immediate questions. How much of the jury's deliberation could have been influenced, and could this have altered the course of Murdaugh's murder conviction? Defense attorneys argued that even the perception of interference could have compromised the integrity of the trial, regardless of the eventual verdict. Factually, the prosecution's case against Murdaugh was built on multiple pillars: surveillance footage, phone videos placing him near the crime scene, and testimony about his inconsistent accounts in the days surrounding the murders. Murdaugh himself admitted on the stand that he had lied repeatedly to law enforcement, describing it as a tangled web of deceit. Yet forensic evidence presented during the trial did not definitively place him in direct contact with the fatal shots fired at Margaret and Paul. This discrepancy is where theory meets evidence. Could Hill's alleged influence have nudged the jury to interpret ambiguous evidence as proof of guilt? Might the pressure, subtle or overt, have caused jurors to overlook inconsistencies in the timeline or gaps in the forensic record? Or is it possible that despite any external pressure, the weight of evidence, including the phone video with 3 voices minutes before the murders, independently confirmed Murdaugh's presence? Another angle to consider: the defense's long-standing argument that the state overemphasized motive related to Murdaugh's financial crimes. Could the jury have been primed, intentionally or not, to link financial misconduct with the killings? And if so, might that have contributed to a quicker conclusion of guilt, even if direct physical evidence tying him to the act was limited? What is clear is that the role of court personnel in high-profile trials is rarely scrutinized until allegations of misconduct surface. The Hill case serves as a reminder that every procedural step, from juror selection to daily courtroom oversight, carries weight in how evidence is interpreted. For audiences, the lingering question remains: could a single individual's influence over the jury shift the trajectory of justice in a case already filled with lies, deception, and tragedy? As Hill resigned in March 2024, the legal battle over her alleged interference continues to ripple through Murdaugh's appeals. Whether the South Carolina Supreme Court will consider her actions sufficient to warrant a new trial remains to be seen. For now, the chapter closes with more questions than answers, challenging the notion that truth and procedure are always aligned in the pursuit of justice. What do you think? Did the clerk's actions impact the jury's decision, or was the evidence against Murdaugh so compelling that outside influence was irrelevant? The Murdaugh saga took yet another dramatic turn in 2023 when the Colleton County Clerk of Court, Rebecca Hill, resigned after pleading guilty to perjury in relation to Alex Murdaugh's murder trial. Hill, who had been responsible for swearing in the jury and shepherding them through 6 weeks of proceedings, had been accused of attempting to influence jurors against Murdaugh. Her guilty plea transformed a mere allegation into a documented credibility crisis, raising questions that could ripple through Murdaugh's appeals. The courtroom drama surrounding the former South Carolina attorney had already been extraordinary. Murdaugh, whose family wielded nearly a century of influence in the region, had been convicted of murdering his wife, Margaret, and their younger son, Paul, in June 2021. The double murder verdict came after weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and witness accounts. Yet the revelation of perjury by a key court official introduced a new layer of uncertainty. Had the jury been subtly steered toward a guilty verdict? Consider the sequence of events. In September 2023, Murdaugh's defense filed a motion claiming that Hill tampered with the jury. Allegedly, Hill advised jurors to not trust Murdaugh's testimony, misrepresented evidence, and sought to remove a juror believed to be sympathetic to the defense. If proven, these claims could have been grounds for a retrial, an extraordinary situation in any court, let alone one already saturated with national attention. Hill, under oath, denied any wrongdoing. She maintained that she had not interfered with the jurors and insisted that all actions taken during the trial were strictly procedural. At the time, the motion remained unresolved, leaving the courtroom and the public suspended between suspicion and certainty. Yet, in a startling development later in 2023, Hill pleaded guilty to perjury during the trial proceedings. The admission raised immediate questions. How much of the jury's deliberation could have been influenced, and could this have altered the course of Murdaugh's murder conviction? Defense attorneys argued that even the perception of interference could have compromised the integrity of the trial, regardless of the eventual verdict. Factually, the prosecution's case against Murdaugh was built on multiple pillars: surveillance footage, phone videos placing him near the crime scene, and testimony about his inconsistent accounts in the days surrounding the murders. Murdaugh himself admitted on the stand that he had lied repeatedly to law enforcement, describing it as a tangled web of deceit. Yet forensic evidence presented during the trial did not definitively place him in direct contact with the fatal shots fired at Margaret and Paul. This discrepancy is where theory meets evidence. Could Hill's alleged influence have nudged the jury to interpret ambiguous evidence as proof of guilt? Might the pressure, subtle or overt, have caused jurors to overlook inconsistencies in the timeline or gaps in the forensic record? Or is it possible that despite any external pressure, the weight of evidence, including the phone video with 3 voices minutes before the murders, independently confirmed Murdaugh's presence? Another angle to consider: the defense's long-standing argument that the state overemphasized motive related to Murdaugh's financial crimes. Could the jury have been primed, intentionally or not, to link financial misconduct with the killings? And if so, might that have contributed to a quicker conclusion of guilt, even if direct physical evidence tying him to the act was limited? What is clear is that the role of court personnel in high-profile trials is rarely scrutinized until allegations of misconduct surface. The Hill case serves as a reminder that every procedural step, from juror selection to daily courtroom oversight, carries weight in how evidence is interpreted. For audiences, the lingering question remains: could a single individual's influence over the jury shift the trajectory of justice in a case already filled with lies, deception, and tragedy? As Hill resigned in March 2024, the legal battle over her alleged interference continues to ripple through Murdaugh's appeals. Whether the South Carolina Supreme Court will consider her actions sufficient to warrant a new trial remains to be seen. For now, the chapter closes with more questions than answers, challenging the notion that truth and procedure are always aligned in the pursuit of justice. What do you think? Did the clerk's actions impact the jury's decision, or was the evidence against Murdaugh so compelling that outside influence was irrelevant? The Murdaugh saga took yet another dramatic turn in 2023, when the Colleton County Clerk of Court, Rebecca Hill, resigned after pleading guilty to perjury in relation to Alex Murdaugh's murder trial. Hill, who had been responsible for swearing in the jury and shepherding them through 6 weeks of proceedings, had been accused of attempting to influence jurors against Murdaugh. Her guilty plea transformed a mere allegation into a documented credibility crisis, raising questions that could ripple through.
What remains clear is that the Alex Murdaugh case is far from a simple narrative of guilt or innocence. The introduction of perjury by a court official underscores the complexity of human behavior in high-stakes legal proceedings. Theories abound. Did the jury tampering influence the verdict? Could evidence have been misinterpreted under the shadow of financial crimes? Was the timing of events fully understood, or are there gaps that may shift understanding of the murders? What do you think? Could the combination of procedural misconduct and intricate family dynamics change how we view the Murdaugh murders? Or are these elements secondary to the overwhelming evidence presented at trial? The answers remain uncertain, but they will shape the next chapter of one of the most extraordinary legal sagas in recent American history. Alex Murdaugh's testimony during the double murder trial revealed a web of deception that extended far beyond the night of his wife Margaret and son Paul's deaths. On the stand, Murdaugh admitted to investigators and family members that he had lied repeatedly about his whereabouts and actions, including his presence near the kennels the night of the murders. He told the court, "Once I lied, I continued to lie. Oh, what a tangled web we weave." These admissions alone cast a shadow over his credibility, raising questions about what might have motivated such dishonesty and how it could intersect with the complex timeline of the murders. The prosecution emphasized that Murdaugh's lies could be seen as an attempt to distract from his financial crimes, arguing that the murders conveniently paused investigations into his misappropriation of millions of dollars. The defense, however, countered that while Murdaugh's deception was clear, it did not directly link him to the killings. They highlighted inconsistencies in the evidence and forensic findings, noting that there were no fingerprints, no blood on his clothes, and no eyewitness accounts placing him at the scene during the time of the murders. Murdaugh admitted lying about being at the kennels the night of the murders. Could these lies have been a symptom of paranoia or addiction rather than evidence of guilt? Might Murdaugh have been attempting to avoid scrutiny simply because he feared exposure of his opioid addiction or financial misdeeds? His repeated dishonesty might have been an attempt to control the narrative rather than a direct admission of involvement in the killings. Video evidence placed Murdaugh near the family estate shortly before the murders, contradicting his initial alibi. Is it possible that he was in the area but unaware of the impending danger? Could the timeline have been misinterpreted, or might someone else have been present who exploited the proximity of Murdaugh to the crime scene? While the video suggests presence, it does not conclusively prove action, leaving room for multiple possibilities in reconstructing events. Forensic analysis indicated Paul died from a contact gunshot to the head, a wound that would have covered the shooter in blood. If Murdaugh had committed the act, would he likely have been drenched in blood? Could someone else have carried out the crime, leaving minimal evidence behind, and Murdaugh's lies simply complicated the investigation? Could the perpetrator have been aware of forensic procedures and taken steps to avoid detection? This raises questions about whether his lies served to obscure personal secrets rather than the direct facts of the murder. Murdaugh's defense noted that no physical evidence definitively linked him to the crime. Is it possible that someone else used the family's familiarity with the property to commit the crime and misdirect suspicion towards Murdaugh? Could an unknown party have taken advantage of his presence or reputation, knowing he was already under scrutiny for unrelated crimes? The lack of conclusive physical evidence leaves room for alternative scenarios. Murdaugh's family, particularly his surviving son Buster, maintained that he was innocent and continued to support efforts for a new trial. Could this support indicate that those closest to him genuinely believe he was not involved? Might the defense's appeal focus on jury tampering and procedural concerns rather than factual innocence, suggesting the case could pivot on legal technicalities as much as evidence? Audience engagement is key here. What do you think? Are Murdaugh's lies evidence of guilt, or do they reflect a complicated personality under immense pressure? Repeated lies were admitted in court regarding minor and major details of his past. Could the lies have created a false narrative that inadvertently aligned with evidence against him, making him appear more culpable than he truly was? Might the tangled web he described simply be a reflection of human error under extreme emotional and legal stress? Ultimately, Murdaugh's repeated lies complicate the story of that fateful night. While some suggest they point to guilt, others argue that deception can stem from fear, addiction, or panic. The challenge for investigators and the public alike is to separate the lies motivated by personal failings from the actions that led to the deaths of Margaret and Paul. In a case this complex, where video, forensics, and testimony intersect in often contradictory ways, the truth may be more elusive than it first appears. What remains certain is that every lie admitted, every contradictory timeline, and every piece of withheld information fuels speculation, but it also invites critical analysis. Could the lies themselves have been the ultimate distraction, masking the real perpetrator? Or were they the only threads linking Murdaugh to the unthinkable? The courtroom may have delivered a verdict, but for the public, the tangled web of Alex Murdaugh's life and deceptions continues to raise questions that demand answers. Evidence presented during Alex Murdaugh's trial suggests he was at the family kennels shortly before the fatal shootings of his wife Margaret and son Paul. This contradicts his initial statements, claiming he had been elsewhere and had not seen them that evening. A video recovered from Paul Murdaugh's phone reportedly captured 3 voices in the background just minutes before the murders. Investigators identified these voices as Alex, Paul, and Margaret, placing the patriarch at the scene despite his repeated claims to law enforcement that he had not been present.
The timing of these events is critical. Authorities estimate the murders occurred between 9 and 9:30 p.m., and Alex called 911 at 10:07 p.m., claiming to have just discovered the bodies. According to his defense, he had been visiting his mother, who suffers from Alzheimer's, and her caregiver, yet the cell phone video suggests he was much closer to the scene, possibly within minutes of the killings. Alex Murdaugh lied about his location that night and admitted to continuing a web of deception after the murders. Could Murdaugh's initial false statements have been an attempt to cover up his presence at the kennels, or was there another reason he misled authorities? It's possible he wanted to create an alibi while under the influence of prescription pain medication, as he later admitted to opioid addiction and withdrawal during that period. Alternatively, could someone else's movements near the kennels have prompted him to fabricate a story about his whereabouts? There is no physical evidence, no fingerprints, DNA, or blood on Alex's clothes linking him to the actual act of murder. Given the brutality of the crimes, with Paul reportedly killed by a close-range shot to the head, anyone committing the act would likely have been covered in blood. Could this suggest that the actual shooter was someone else entirely, and Alex's presence near the kennels might have been coincidental? Or, if he was there, was he aware of a confrontation that escalated before he arrived? Investigators also noted discrepancies between Alex's timeline and the forensic evidence. He arrived at his mother's house around 10 p.m., reportedly free of blood, just minutes after the murders occurred. Could the killer have left the scene quickly, explaining the absence of forensic traces on Alex if he happened to arrive shortly after the murders? Or might this indicate that Alex's presence at the kennels was brief and he did not physically participate in the killings, despite being near the scene? It's likely that time and distance play a critical role in understanding what truly happened that night. The Murdaugh family estate is large, with multiple access points to the kennels and surrounding property. No forced entry was reported at the murder scene. Could the killer have been someone familiar with the property, allowing them to move without drawing attention? Or did someone inside, possibly knowing Alex's schedule, manipulate events to create confusion and mislead investigators? The possibilities remain open, but proximity and familiarity with the estate seem essential in reconstructing the sequence of events. Murdaugh's lawyers argue that motives proposed by the prosecution, primarily to distract from financial crimes, are extremely weak and circumstantial. If financial distraction was unlikely, what else could explain Alex's behavior and presence near the kennels? Could fear, addiction, or mental instability have influenced his actions? Or could a third party have exploited these factors to create suspicion around him? The theory here isn't to accuse, but to consider how overlapping personal, legal, and family pressures might have contributed to a chaotic night with tragic results. The double murder trial ultimately resulted in Alex Murdaugh's conviction, but appeals and continued scrutiny suggest that certain aspects of the case, including his presence at the kennels, remain points of debate. Could new evidence, such as additional video, phone records, or witness testimony, emerge to clarify the timeline further? What do you think? Was Alex merely near the scene, or is there more to the story that the public hasn't seen yet? When prosecutors presented their case against Alex Murdaugh, a central argument rested on motive. They claimed that financial crimes, mounting over years, drove him to murder his wife Margaret and son Paul. According to the state, the killings would have paused any scrutiny into Murdaugh's complex web of alleged fraud, embezzlement, and insurance schemes, allowing him to escape accountability. On paper, the theory has a certain logic. Murdaugh faced over 100 charges related to financial misconduct, ranging from breach of trust and money laundering to computer crimes and tax evasion. To the public, it seemed to offer a neat explanation for the unthinkable, a wealthy, powerful man pushed to extremes. Yet the defense challenged this theory at every turn. Murdaugh's attorneys argued that the supposed financial motive was thin and circumstantial. They highlighted that the alleged motive, if true, would require him to commit a murder so conspicuous it would immediately focus law enforcement scrutiny on himself. Why risk murder when it would inevitably intensify investigations rather than divert them? Defense experts repeatedly stressed that the timeline of the crime did not match the prosecution's claims. For instance, forensic evidence suggested that Paul's death came from a contact wound at close range, a shot so violent that anyone responsible would have been covered in blood. Yet within 45 minutes, Murdaugh appeared at his mother's house 10 miles away, reportedly clean and free of any evidence linking him to the scene. Adding to the complexity, Murdaugh's defense drew attention to gaps in the physical evidence. There were no fingerprints or DNA tying him directly to the murders, no eyewitness accounts placing him at the crime scene during the critical moments, and no confession. In court, Murdaugh admitted to misleading law enforcement about his whereabouts on the night of the killings, but his lawyers argued these lies stemmed from paranoia and addiction-related confusion, not from the orchestration of murder. Based on the facts, several alternative theories could be considered. Could someone with access to the family property, perhaps known to the household, have been responsible? Might the proximity of voices captured on Paul's phone indicate multiple people present at the estate in the minutes leading up to the murders? Could the focus on financial crimes in the prosecution's case have overshadowed other potential lines of inquiry? It is possible, the defense suggested, that the murders were committed by a person or persons entirely unconnected to Murdaugh's financial dealings, and that circumstantial coincidences, such as his widely publicized scandals and publicized struggles with opioid addiction, shaped the narrative of motive. Even the prosecution's evidence for motive raises questions. Murdaugh's financial misdeeds, while undeniable, were primarily linked to complex schemes involving insurance fraud, misappropriation of settlement funds, and money laundering. Could someone argue that these crimes, which spanned years, would truly drive a single act of violent murder? Was it likely that committing double homicide would offer a more effective shield against financial scrutiny than cooperating with investigations or relying on legal defenses? These are questions the defense presented to the jury, aiming to challenge the state's assertion that financial gain alone could explain such a brutal act. Ultimately, the prosecution framed Murdaugh's alleged motive as a combination of desperation and opportunity, desperate to prevent exposure for financial crimes, opportunistic in using the murders as a shield. Yet the facts leave room for doubt. The sequence of events, forensic inconsistencies, and lack of direct evidence create a complex picture in which motive is suggested but far from conclusively proven. The trial concluded with a guilty verdict, yet the debate over motive continues. Could the murders have been the product of another, as yet unexplored scenario? Might the intertwining of addiction, personal turmoil, and family dynamics have influenced events in ways the prosecution did not fully address? As this case moves through appeals and scrutiny, these questions remain. What truly drove the crime, and how much of the narrative was shaped by assumption rather than irrefutable fact? What do you think? Was the prosecution's motive theory sufficient to explain the unimaginable, or does the case still leave room for unanswered questions? One of the most confounding aspects of the Murdaugh double murder case lies not in what investigators found, but in what they did not. Despite the high-profile nature of the slayings, authorities reported an almost complete absence of physical evidence directly linking Alex Murdaugh to the deaths of his wife Margaret and their son Paul. No fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness testimony, and crucially, no confession tied him to the scene. Even more strikingly, forensic experts noted that the close-range gunshot wound to Paul's head would have produced significant blood spatter. Yet when Murdaugh appeared at his mother's house mere minutes later, he was reportedly pristine, clothes clean, no visible signs of blood.
This absence of evidence has created a peculiar paradox. On one hand, the prosecution built a narrative that Murdaugh had a motive to divert attention from his sprawling financial crimes. On the other, the defense has consistently highlighted gaps in the forensic record, arguing that the crime scene evidence, or lack thereof, fails to definitively place Murdaugh at the point of violence. The grand jury ultimately found him guilty, yet questions linger about the physical inconsistencies, especially given the extreme nature of the wounds suffered by Paul and Margaret.
Investigators found no fingerprints, blood transfer, or other physical markers tying Murdaugh to the killings. Could it be possible that the perpetrator was careful to avoid leaving trace evidence, or might someone else have been present at the scene? Could the clean appearance of Murdaugh after the murders indicate that he was not physically involved in the act itself, or could it be explained by some rapid attempt to remove or avoid contamination? Murdaugh admitted under oath to lying about his whereabouts on the night of the murders, including whether he visited the kennels. Might these lies have been motivated by shame, paranoia, or drug use rather than guilt for the killings? Could his inconsistent statements have inadvertently created suspicion without being conclusive proof of his involvement? Video evidence placed Murdaugh at the property shortly before the murders, contradicting parts of his earlier timeline. Could this simply indicate he was nearby but not the shooter? Or might there have been a brief, unnoticed confrontation with another party? Does proximity alone necessarily imply culpability, or could other explanations fit the timeline? The lack of forced entry into the home or kennels. Could the perpetrator have had access to keys, or were they let in by someone already inside? Does this point to someone familiar with the property rather than a random intruder, or is it possible a professional acted deliberately to avoid signs of entry? The extreme severity of Paul's head injury. Whoever fired the fatal shot would likely have been covered in blood and tissue. How could the person responsible appear clean shortly afterward? Could another individual have carried out the act while Murdaugh was elsewhere on the property, or might there have been rapid cleanup involved? No eyewitnesses or confessions exist. Could there have been multiple people involved, some of whom have not come forward? Could the absence of testimony indicate fear, loyalty, or simply that no one saw the crucial moments unfold? Murdaugh's prior history of lying and manipulation in financial crimes. Might this pattern of deception contribute to the perception of guilt, even in the absence of direct physical evidence? Could the prosecution's narrative be partially shaped by the public's awareness of his other criminal activities rather than by forensic certainty? Ultimately, the absence of physical evidence leaves room for speculation, but it also underscores the need for careful analysis of fact-based timelines. Every clean shirt, every missing fingerprint, and every contradicting statement adds a layer of mystery to what is already one of the most complex and high-profile murder cases in recent American history. While the jury has delivered its verdict, the exact mechanics of that night, how the murders occurred, who was involved, and the precise sequence of events remain questions that could still be explored. What do you think? Could the true sequence of events be different from the version presented at trial, or does the lack of physical evidence strengthen the theory that the shooter was someone else entirely? When the forensic experts took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Their testimony was precise, technical, and in some ways unsettling. Paul Murdaugh had been killed by a contact gunshot, one so devastating that the expert testified the shooter would have been covered from head to toe in blood and brain matter. Yet, within 45 minutes of the time of death, Alex Murdaugh reportedly arrived at his mother's home more than 10 miles away with no visible signs of blood. This discrepancy became a pivotal point of debate. Fact after fact, the forensic evidence appeared clear, but interpretation became complex. No fingerprints or DNA were recovered linking Murdaugh to the scene of the murders. The defense emphasized that while Murdaugh lied repeatedly to investigators about his whereabouts, these lies alone did not place him at the scene of the killings. Could it be possible that someone else entered the Murdaugh property, executed a calculated attack, and left before the patriarch's arrival? Or, as the prosecution argued, did his absence from the crime scene in the immediate aftermath signify premeditation and planning? Other forensic details added layers to the mystery. Investigators noted the lack of forced entry at the Murdaugh estate. The gate was unlocked, the kennel doors undisturbed, and no alarms triggered. Could the killer have had a key, or perhaps someone trusted by the family, someone already familiar with the property, allowed access without suspicion. Each theory must wrestle with the stark reality of the evidence while respecting what remains unverified. The timeline itself raises questions. Alex Murdaugh claimed he had been visiting his mother, yet cell phone video and witness testimony placed him near the estate minutes before the deaths. Could he have been attempting to fabricate an alibi in real time? Or was the footage misinterpreted, showing him at the edge of the property without entering the scene of the crime? Experts stressed the importance of corroborating these movements against concrete forensic data, highlighting how easily perception can diverge from reality.
Then there is the matter of motive. Prosecutors proposed that Alex's financial crimes could have driven him to murder his wife and son to buy time and divert attention. Yet the defense countered that the theory was speculative at best. Could a man facing overwhelming legal scrutiny truly believe that committing a double homicide would provide cover? Or might the motive have been misrepresented, intentionally or not, to fit the narrative of the prosecution? Forensic testimony also explored the type of weapons used. Close-range shots from a shotgun and an AR-style rifle were cited. Could the killer have been someone with knowledge of firearms and the confidence to commit such a precise and brutal act? And if so, how does this reconcile with the lack of blood on Murdaugh upon his arrival at his mother's home? The contradictions between the science of the scene and the story presented have fueled public debate, and they continue to haunt the case even after a conviction. Finally, we must consider the broader context. Alex Murdaugh's history of deception, financial misconduct, and orchestrated schemes adds layers to his character, but it does not definitively answer the forensic questions. Could it be that the evidence points to him circumstantially but not conclusively? Or is it possible that investigators interpreted the facts in a way that fit the prevailing narrative, leaving alternative explanations unexplored? As the chapter closes, the question remains: how do we reconcile the brutal reality of Paul and Margaret Murdaugh's deaths with the forensic anomalies that continue to puzzle experts? Could someone else have been involved, or was this a crime executed by someone attempting to evade immediate detection? The answers are not straightforward, but the evidence itself challenges us to think critically, to question assumptions, and to remain vigilant about the difference between theory and fact. What do you think? Does the forensic record point to Alex Murdaugh, or is there a possibility the true story is more complicated than anyone has yet admitted? One of the most perplexing details emerging from the investigation is Alex Murdaugh's appearance in the immediate aftermath of the murders. According to reports, Murdaugh arrived at his mother's home approximately 45 minutes after the estimated time of death of Margaret and Paul. Witnesses and law enforcement noted that his clothing appeared unsoiled and there were no visible traces of blood on his person. In a crime scene marked by violent, close-range gunshot wounds, some experts argue that anyone directly involved in the shootings would almost certainly have been covered in blood, hair, or tissue. This discrepancy has fueled debate among legal analysts, forensic specialists, and true crime enthusiasts alike. While prosecutors presented video evidence placing Murdaugh near the scene shortly before the murders, the lack of physical evidence on his person introduces a puzzling question. How could he have been so proximate to the killings, yet appear pristine shortly afterward? Forensic theory suggests several possibilities. One explanation could be that Murdaugh did not physically commit the murders himself, despite being present at the estate. If an unknown assailant carried out the killings, Murdaugh might have arrived after the shots were fired, encountering the bodies while they were already deceased. This timeline would align with the lack of blood on his clothing and the apparent absence of defensive struggles by anyone at the scene. Another possible theory involves environmental and situational factors. Could it be that Murdaugh's path to his mother's home allowed him to avoid contamination? Perhaps he did not come into direct contact with the victims after the fatal shots, or the angle and distance of the shooter relative to Murdaugh limited exposure. While conceivable, forensic experts caution that even minimal contact in such violent circumstances typically leaves some evidence, making this explanation less likely but still worth considering. A further element complicating the narrative is Murdaugh's behavior following the discovery of the bodies.
Reports indicate he immediately called 911 and described finding his wife and son in distress. His voice, reportedly quivering on the call, could be interpreted in several ways: genuine shock, calculated performance, or a mix of both. The fact that Murdaugh later admitted to lying about his whereabouts earlier in the evening adds another layer of complexity. Could these inconsistencies reflect attempts to shield himself from scrutiny, or were they symptoms of his ongoing opioid addiction and mental state in the days following the traumatic events? Theories around motive also intersect with the clean appearance question. Prosecutors argued that Murdaugh's alleged financial misdeeds provided him with a motive to commit the murders, to distract from ongoing investigations and buy sympathy. Yet defense attorneys and some analysts point out the extreme improbability of carrying out such violent acts without leaving physical evidence, especially when forensic reconstructions suggest that Paul's fatal headshot would have caused significant blood spatter. Could it be that the Murdaghs were intended to send a message to someone, or were executed by an individual seeking to frame Murdaugh? The possibility remains open, supported by the absence of direct forensic traces linking him to the act itself. Adding to the uncertainty, law enforcement statements suggest cell phone videos captured Murdaugh near the estate minutes before the killings, contradicting some of his prior statements. This evidence situates him in the vicinity without clarifying his involvement. Could these digital footprints reflect mere coincidence, or do they indicate that Murdaugh had indirect knowledge of the crimes? While no definitive conclusion has been publicly verified, the discrepancy between proximity and physical evidence continues to spark intense debate. Ultimately, the clean appearance detail invites viewers and investigators alike to reconsider assumptions about presence, participation, and timing. It raises fundamental questions about the sequence of events. Who pulled the trigger? How long did the assailant remain at the scene? Could someone have manipulated the environment to shield themselves or another individual from forensic detection? What do you think? Could Murdaugh have truly been at the scene yet avoided contamination? Or does this suggest the involvement of another unknown party? The timeline, the lack of blood, and the contradictions in testimony leave room for multiple interpretations. As investigators piece together cell phone data, forensic reports, and witness statements, this critical piece remains a puzzle piece in understanding the tragedy that unfolded on June 7, 2021.
As Alex Murdaugh's legal battles unfolded, public attention often turned toward his family, who remained intertwined in the story of tragedy, deception, and legal scandal. One of the most visible figures in this support network has been his son, Buster Murdaugh. While the family's public statements were sparse, Buster's occasional appearances and comments demonstrated a careful balancing act, supporting his father while avoiding the intense scrutiny of media coverage. Observers noted that his support seemed to reinforce the narrative of Alex's innocence, at least in the eyes of the family, even as the courts continued to deliver convictions on both the double murder and financial crimes. Buster's role raises important questions about familial loyalty in high-profile cases. Factually, he accompanied Alex through parts of the trial and maintained private communications, reportedly offering moral support and guidance. But could this familial allegiance have influenced public perception or even trial proceedings? It is possible that Buster's consistent presence created an image of solidarity, intentionally or otherwise, which might have subtly swayed public opinion in favor of Alex during moments of intense media speculation. Evidence also suggests that Alex himself relied heavily on the family's support network during the most turbulent periods of 2021 and 2022. After the killings of his wife Margaret and son Paul in June 2021, Alex immediately sought to provide an alibi and manage public narrative, claiming he had been with his mother and her caregiver at the time of the murders. This claim, later complicated by video evidence placing him near the crime scene, highlights the tension between public statements and private realities. Could Alex's reliance on family have been both a genuine support mechanism and a calculated attempt to maintain credibility while investigations intensified? It's likely that both elements played a role. Another fact worth noting is the timing of key events.
Just days after discovering the bodies of his wife and son, Alex's father, Randolph Murdaugh III, passed away. The death of a patriarch already shrouded in the legacy of public office may have added emotional complexity, creating both genuine grief and potential distraction from the ongoing investigations. From a theoretical standpoint, the convergence of personal loss and public scrutiny might have influenced how Alex's family framed his narrative to the outside world. Could their public support have been motivated by loyalty, grief, or a strategic desire to shape perception? Possibly all three. Buster's visible support also intersects with the appeal and ongoing legal maneuvering. Alex's attorneys have argued that procedural issues, including alleged jury tampering by the Colleton County Clerk of Court, could justify a new trial. Within this context, family endorsement gains additional weight. Maintaining a united front reinforces a narrative of trust and credibility that may indirectly support legal strategies. It's possible that Buster's measured public presence is part of a broader effort to signal stability and confidence, even as Alex faces decades in prison. Finally, one of the more subtle but striking aspects of the family's public support is the absence of inflammatory statements. Unlike some high-profile cases where relatives openly attack prosecutors or media outlets, the Murdaugh family has largely remained silent in public forums. Could this restraint indicate a calculated legal strategy, or is it simply an attempt to avoid further media scrutiny and emotional exposure? Likely, it is a combination of caution, loyalty, and legal counsel, each influencing how the story is presented to the public. The intersection of crime, family, and public perception in the Murdaugh saga leaves lingering questions. How much influence does familial support truly have on perception, and can it shape the outcome of appeals or ongoing legal challenges? While facts point to a family deeply invested in the patriarch's welfare, the theories that emerge about loyalty, strategy, and narrative control invite audiences to reflect. What do you think motivated Buster's unwavering support, and how might it impact the unfolding story of Alex Murdaugh? The conviction of Alex Murdaugh for the murders of his wife and son shocked South Carolina and captivated the nation, but the story didn't end when the jury returned its guilty verdict. For the Murdaugh's defense team, the central question now isn't whether the crimes themselves were heinous, it's whether he received a fair trial. And in high-profile cases like this one, fairness is never simple. From the beginning, the Murdaugh trial was intertwined with layers of financial scandals, insurance fraud, and past deaths that complicated the narrative. Prosecutors argued that the murders were a calculated effort to distract from Alex's mounting financial crimes. His defense counters that this motive is tenuous at best, pointing to inconsistencies in the timeline, lack of direct physical evidence, and the possibility of alternative explanations for the crime. These are questions that the defense hopes the appeals process will explore. Another critical point in the appeal centers on jury conduct. Allegations emerged that Rebecca Hill, the Colleton County Clerk of Court, may have influenced the jury's deliberations. She allegedly pressured jurors to reach a guilty verdict, misrepresented evidence to the trial judge, and even attempted to remove a juror perceived as sympathetic to Murdaugh. While Hill has denied wrongdoing in the past, she later pled guilty to perjury. Could these actions have unfairly shaped the jury's decision? Might the appeal court view these claims as a legitimate reason for a retrial? The defense certainly believes so. Then there's the question of testimony. Alex Murdaugh admitted in court that he lied about his whereabouts in the hours before his wife and son were killed. He explained, "Once I told the lie, I had to keep lying." Could his dishonesty about being at the kennels, fueled by fear and drug use, have inadvertently painted him in a more suspicious light than warranted? Might the jury have misinterpreted these lies as evidence of guilt rather than a symptom of addiction and stress?
The defense also highlights the lack of certain direct evidence. No fingerprints or DNA conclusively link Murdaugh to the crime scene, and no witnesses placed him committing the act. Is it possible that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on circumstantial connections and motive speculation?
Could a retrial allow more focused examination of physical evidence, separating the murder charges from the financial crimes that dominated headlines for years? Finally, there's the human element. Murdaugh's family dynamics, including the grief of his surviving son, Buster, and the complicated legacy of the Murdaugh legal dynasty, add layers of psychological complexity. Could the intense media coverage and public scrutiny have influenced jurors, consciously or subconsciously? Might a fresh trial in a less charged atmosphere allow for a more impartial assessment of the facts? As the South Carolina Supreme Court prepares to hear arguments, the nation watches, grappling with the uneasy tension between justice, fairness, and the complex web of facts surrounding the Murdaugh saga. In conclusion, the Murdaugh case remains a labyrinth of tragedy, deception, and legal battles. While Alex Murdaugh has been convicted of murdering his wife and son, questions linger about certain timelines, motives, and the alleged jury tampering. Could gaps in evidence or overlooked details shift our understanding of what really happened that night? Might the financial crimes have been intertwined with the slayings, or were they merely coincidental? As the appeal process unfolds, new revelations could emerge, challenging previous assumptions. What do you think? Was this a carefully orchestrated crime, or is there more yet to uncover?